The air in the studio did not just feel cold. It felt frozen solid. You could see it in the eyes of the camera operators who suddenly stopped moving. You could hear it in the silence that dropped like a heavy stone onto the floor. This was supposed to be a standard interview. It was supposed to be polite. It was supposed to be safe. But within 30 seconds, the entire room knew that something had gone terribly wrong. One woman sat with her back straight, her hands folded perfectly in her lap, wearing a smile that did not reach her eyes. The other woman leaned forward, holding a stack of papers like a weapon ready to strike. The lights were bright, hotter than usual, sweating under the pressure of millions of viewers watching at home. But the people in the room were not thinking about the viewers. They were thinking about the woman across from them. They were thinking about the trap that had been set. And they were wondering if the person who said it was about to get caught in it instead. The tension was so thick you could almost taste it. It tasted like metal. It tasted like fear. Everyone waited for the first question. Everyone waited for the first crack in the armor. No one expected that the armor would not crack. No one expected that the sword would break. This was not just an interview. This was a battle for control. And the person who thought they held all the cards was about to learn a very painful lesson. The clock on the wall ticked louder than ever before. Tick, tick, tick. Each second felt like an hour. The host opened her mouth to speak, confident and sharp, but the guest simply stared. She did not blink. She did not flinch. She just waited. And in that waiting, the power shifted. It shifted slowly, quietly, but undeniably. The host smiled, but it was a tight smile, a nervous smile. She knew something was off. She could feel the eyes of her producer burning into the back of her neck. She could feel the audience holding their breath. She tried to push forward, to take charge, to dominate the conversation as she always did. But the energy in the room had changed. It was no longer hers. It belonged to the silence. It belonged to the woman who said nothing. And that silence was louder than any shout. If you are feeling the tension rise just from these words, imagine being there in the room. Imagine the sweat on your palms. Imagine the fear in your chest. If you want to see more stories that peel back the curtain on these high-stakes moments, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. We dive deep into the moments that change history, the moments that define careers, and the moments that leave everyone speechless. Join us as we uncover the truth behind the headlines. Stay with us because what happened next was not just surprising, it was shocking. Megyn Kelly had built her career on being tough. She was known for asking the questions nobody else dared to ask. She was known for cutting through the noise and getting to the hard truth. Her reputation was built on making powerful people uncomfortable. She had faced presidents, celebrities, and billionaires, and she had never backed down. She walked into this studio believing she was in complete control. She had prepared for weeks. She had read every book, watched every speech, and studied every mannerism of her guest. She had a list of topics that she knew would be difficult. She had a strategy to corner her guest, to force a reaction, to get a headline-making moment. She believed that Melania Trump was soft. She believed that Melania was quiet because she had nothing to say. She believed that if she pushed hard enough, the facade would crumble. Megyn adjusted her notes on the desk. She smoothed her jacket. She looked directly into the camera lens, projecting confidence and authority. She turned to her guest with a look that said, "I am going to break you." But Melania did not look broken. She looked calm. She looked composed. She looked like someone who had seen this movie before and knew exactly how it ended. There was a stillness about her that was unsettling. It was not the stillness of fear. It was the stillness of a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. Or perhaps it was the stillness of someone who simply did not care about the game being played. Megyn began to speak. Her voice was smooth and professional. She welcomed the audience. She introduced her guest with a tone that was polite but carried a hidden edge. She mentioned the controversies. She mentioned the rumors. She mentioned the doubts. She laid out the battlefield before the war even began. She wanted to establish dominance early. She wanted to show that she was the one driving this car. But as she spoke, she noticed something strange. Melania was not listening to the words. She was watching Megyn's hands. She was watching the way Megyn shifted in her seat. She was reading the body language, not the script. It was a small detail, but it was significant. It suggested that Melania was not interested in the questions. She was interested in the person asking them. The dynamic in the room was shifting in real time. Usually in these interviews, the host holds the power. The host controls the flow. The host decides what is important, but here the gravity seemed to pull toward the guest. Megyn asked her first real question. It was a sharp one. It was about the past. It was about choices made long ago. It was designed to put Melania on the defensive. It was designed to make her explain herself. But Melania did not explain. She did not defend. She simply answered with a short, clear sentence. Then she stopped. She did not elaborate. She did not offer more information. She did not try to justify her life. She just answered and waited. This threw Megyn off balance. She was used to people talking too much. She was used to people rambling when they were nervous. She was used to people trying to win her over with words. But Melania gave her nothing to work with. The answer was complete, but it was empty of emotion. It was like hitting a wall of glass. You could see through it, but you could not break it. Megyn tried to pivot. She tried to ask a follow-up question that was even more aggressive. She brought up a specific incident from years ago. She cited a source. She pressed for a reaction. She leaned in closer, her eyes narrowing. She wanted anger. She wanted tears. She wanted a slip-up. But Melania just tilted her head slightly. She looked at Megyn with an expression that was impossible to read. Was it pity? Was it amusement? Was it boredom? It was none of those things, and yet it was all of them. The audience at home was leaning in. Social media was starting to buzz. People were tweeting about the intensity. People were wondering why Melania was so calm. Was she hiding something, or was she just stronger than everyone thought? The uncertainty was driving the engagement. The mystery was the hook, and Megyn was starting to realize that she was losing the narrative. Every great story has a turning point, a moment where everything changes. If you are enjoying this deep dive into one of the most tense media moments in recent history, please take a second to share this video with a friend who loves political drama. Let them know what they are missing. Your support helps us bring you these detailed, emotional breakdowns of the events that shape our world. And remember, the biggest reveal is still coming. Do not click away. The worst is yet to come. Megyn decided to change tactics. If direct attacks were not working, she would try empathy. She would try to connect on a human level. She softened her voice. She talked about the difficulties of living in the public eye. She talked about the pressure of being judged by millions of people. She tried to build a bridge. She hoped that Melania would cross it and open up. She hoped that Melania would share a personal struggle, a moment of weakness, a story of pain. This was a common technique. Make the guest feel understood and they will let their guard down. Megyn smiled warmly. She nodded sympathetically. She created a space that felt safe. For a moment, it seemed like it might work. Melania's posture relaxed slightly. Her eyes softened. She began to speak about her family. She spoke about her son. She spoke about the desire to protect him. Her voice was gentle. It was authentic. The room felt warmer. The tension eased. Megyn felt a surge of confidence. She had done it. She had cracked the code. She had found the entry point. She prepared to ask a deeper question, one that would link this personal sentiment to a political controversy. She thought she had trapped Melania in a corner of her own emotions. She thought she could use this vulnerability against her. But she had misread the situation completely. Melania was not opening up because she was weak. She was opening up because she was choosing to. She was controlling the narrative by giving exactly what was asked and nothing more. She was showing humanity, but she was not showing weakness. There is a huge difference, and Megyn was about to find out just how big that difference was. As Melania finished her sentence about her son, she paused. The pause was deliberate. It hung in the air. Then she looked directly at Megyn and said, "But you know what it is like to be judged, don't you?" The question was simple, but it was loaded. It was a mirror. It reflected Megyn's own struggles back at her. It reminded everyone in the room that Megyn had also been canceled, criticized, and attacked. It was a subtle reminder that they were both targets. It was a power move disguised as empathy. Megyn blinked. She was caught off guard. She had forgotten that her guest was watching her just as closely as she was watching her guest. The bridge Megyn had built was now being used by Melania to walk right back into the center of the stage. The atmosphere in the studio shifted again. The warmth evaporated. The cold returned, but this time it was different. It was not the cold of anticipation. It was the cold of confrontation. Megyn realized that she was no longer the hunter. She was being hunted. She tried to laugh it off. She tried to brush aside the comment as a clever deflection, but the damage was done. The audience saw it. The cameras saw it. The dynamic had flipped. Melania was no longer the passive subject. She was an active participant. She was steering the ship. Megyn rushed to regain control. She moved to the next topic on her list. It was a heavier topic. It was about policy. It was about decisions made in the White House. She asked about a specific initiative that had failed. She asked who was to blame. She asked if Melania regretted staying silent during those times. It was a direct challenge to Melania's role and her integrity. It was designed to make her look complicit or ignorant. Megyn's voice was firm. Her eyes were locked on Melania's face. She waited for the stumble. She waited for the hesitation. But Melania did not hesitate. She answered with precision. She corrected a factual error in Megyn's premise. She did so politely but firmly. She pointed out that the timeline Megyn described was incorrect. She cited a date. She cited a public record. It was a small correction, but it was devastating. It showed that Melania was informed. It showed that she was paying attention. It showed that Megyn had not done her homework as well as she thought. The producers in the control room exchanged worried glances. This was not going according to plan. The guest was not folding. The guest was fighting back with facts, and facts are harder to argue with than emotions. Megyn flushed slightly. She shuffled her papers. She tried to recover. She claimed that the date was a minor detail. She tried to move on quickly, but the momentum was lost. The audience sensed the shift. They sensed that the host was rattled. They sensed that the guest was steady. The power balance was tipping further. If you are fascinated by how body language and subtle cues can change the outcome of a high-stakes conversation, let us know in the comments below. What do you think was the exact moment Megyn lost control? Was it the question about the past? Or was it the mirror moment? Your insights help us understand these complex interactions better. And don't forget to like this video if you appreciate the detailed analysis. We work hard to bring you the most gripping stories from the world of politics and media. Keep watching, because the tension is only going to escalate. Megyn decided to go for the jugular. She abandoned the subtle approach. She abandoned the empathetic approach. She went straight for the controversy that had defined Melania's public image for years. She brought up the plagiarism allegations from the convention speech. It was an old wound, but it was still sensitive. Megyn presented it as a question of character. She asked if Melania felt ashamed. She asked if she felt she had betrayed the trust of the American people. It was a harsh question. It was designed to provoke shame. It was designed to make Melania feel small. The room went deadly silent. Even the crew stopped breathing. This was the moment. This was the trap. If Melania got angry, she looked guilty. If she cried, she looked weak. If she denied it aggressively, she looked defensive. There was no good answer, or so Megyn thought. Melania looked at Megyn. She did not look away. She did not look down. She held the gaze for a long, uncomfortable second. Then she spoke. Her voice was low, but it carried to every corner of the room. She said that she had learned from her mistakes. She said that she had grown. She said that she did not define herself by the errors of her past, but by the work of her present. It was a non-answer, but it was a powerful one. It refused to engage with the shame. It refused to accept the frame of the question. It reframed the narrative from guilt to growth. It was sophisticated. It was mature. It left Megyn with nowhere to go. If Megyn pushed harder, she would look like a bully. If she accepted the answer, she would look like she had lost. She was stuck. She tried to press further. She asked for specifics. She asked what she had learned, but Melania just smiled, a small, enigmatic smile. She said that is a personal journey, and then she stopped. The wall was back up, higher than before, thicker than before. Megyn was pounding her fists against a fortress that had no gates. The frustration on Megyn's face was visible, her jaw tight. Her fingers tapped rapidly on the desk. She was running out of options. She had used her best shots and none of them had landed. She was starting to look desperate. She started talking faster. She started interrupting. She started overlapping Melania's answers. This is a sign of losing control. When a host starts interrupting, it means they are afraid of the silence. They are afraid of what the guest I'd say if given the space. Megyn was trying to fill the air with her own voice to drown out the growing sense that she was losing. But the more she talked, the less authority she had. The audience could see the panic setting in. They could see the cracks in the professional facade. Melania, on the other hand, remained perfectly still. She let Megyn talk. She let Megyn exhaust herself. She waited for the pauses, and when she did speak, her words were few, but they landed with weight. It was a masterclass in restraint. It was a demonstration of power through silence. Megyn was spinning her wheels. Melania was standing still. And in a race, the one who stands still while the other runs in circles eventually looks like the winner. The contrast was stark. It was visual. It was undeniable. The narrative of the weak, silent wife was dying in real time. In its place was rising the image of a woman who could not be shaken, a woman who could not be bullied, a woman who knew her own worth. As the interview progressed, the questions became more erratic. Megyn jumped from topic to topic. She asked about fashion, she asked about travel, she asked about foreign policy. She was grasping at straws. She was trying to find any angle that would give her a win, but Melania handled each one with the same calm detachment. She answered the fashion questions with grace. She answered the travel questions with brevity. She answered the policy questions with caution. She never slipped. She never got angry. She never got emotional. She was a rock in a storm, and the storm was getting worse. Megyn's voice rose in pitch. Her gestures became larger. She was performing for the camera, but the performance was failing. The authenticity was gone. All that was left was the aggression. And aggression without results looks like weakness. The viewers at home were starting to turn. The comment sections were flooding with support for Melania. People were praising her poise. People were criticizing Megyn's rudeness. The tide had turned. The debate that was supposed to expose Melania was exposing Megyn instead. It was exposing her insecurity. It was exposing her need for control. It was exposing her inability to handle a guest who would not play by her rules. If you have ever been in a situation where someone tried to intimidate you, you know how satisfying it is to remain calm. It is a superpower. If you believe that calmness is strength, type calm in the comments below. Let's see how many of us value composure over chaos. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel. We bring you these intense psychological breakdowns of public figures every week. You won't want to miss what happens in the final minutes of this interview. It gets even more intense. Then came the moment that would define the entire interview. It was not a question about policy. It was not a question about the past. It was a question about the future. Megyn asked Melania what her legacy would be. It was a broad, philosophical question. It was a chance for Melania to speak from the heart. Megyn likely expected a rehearsed line about charity or children. She expected a safe, generic answer. But Melania surprised her. She looked deep into the camera. She spoke about dignity. She spoke about respect. She spoke about the importance of treating people with kindness regardless of their status. It was a simple message, but it was delivered with such conviction that it felt revolutionary. And then she added a twist. She said that dignity is not given, it is taken. It is claimed, it is protected. And sometimes protecting dignity requires silence. It requires ignoring the noise. It requires refusing to engage with those who seek to diminish you. It was a direct reference to Megyn. It was a direct reference to the interview itself. Melania was telling Megyn and the world that her silence was not weakness. It was a choice. It was a shield. And Megyn was banging against that shield, trying to break it, but failing. The message was clear. You cannot hurt me with your words because I do not value your judgment. That is the ultimate insult to a journalist whose power comes from judgment. Megyn froze. She understood the subtext. She understood that she had been dismissed. Not angrily, not rudely, but completely. She had been rendered irrelevant. The look on her face was one of shock. She had never been dismissed like that before. She was used to being feared. She was used to being respected. She was not used to being ignored while sitting right in front of her. The silence that followed was deafening. It lasted for 5 seconds. In television time, 5 seconds is an eternity. It is a lifetime. The producers were screaming in Megyn's earpiece, telling her to move on, to cut to commercial, to do something. But Megyn was paralyzed. She was processing the blow. She was trying to find a way to recover. But there was no recovery. The spell was broken. The magic trick had been revealed. The Emperor had no clothes. Megyn finally spoke. Her voice was shaky. She thanked Melania for her time. It was a weak ending. It was a surrender. She did not get the last word. She did not get the knockout punch. She got a polite dismissal, and that was worse than any argument. An argument implies equality. A dismissal implies superiority. Melania had positioned herself above the fray. She had positioned herself above Megyn, and the audience knew it. The applause from the small studio audience was polite, but it felt hollow. They knew they had witnessed something unusual. They knew they had witnessed a defeat. But it was a quiet defeat. It was a dignified defeat, and that made it sting even more for Megyn. As the cameras cut away, the tension in the room did not dissipate. It lingered. Megyn sat there, staring at her notes, which now seemed useless. Melania stood up smoothly. She adjusted her dress. She smiled at the crew. She walked out of the studio with her head held high. She did not look back. She did not check to see if Megyn was watching. She just left. And in leaving, she sealed her victory. Megyn was left alone in the spotlight with the bright lights glaring down on her, exposing every line of stress on her face. The crew began to pack up. They moved quietly, respectfully, but there was a buzz in the air. They were talking about what had just happened. They were sharing their awe. They were sharing their surprise. The story was no longer about what Megyn had asked. It was about how Melania had answered, or rather, how she had not answered. It was about the power of presence. It was about the power of self-possession. In the hours that followed, the internet exploded. Clips of the interview went viral, but not the clips of Megyn asking tough questions, the clips of Melania's calm responses, the clips of the silence, the clips of the smile. Memes were created, articles were written, pundits debated. Some called it a disaster for Megyn, others called it a masterpiece for Melania. The divide was immediate and sharp. Supporters of Melania saw her as a hero who had stood up to the media machine. Critics saw her as evasive and cold. But everyone agreed on one thing: it was unforgettable. It was a moment that changed the perception of Melania Trump. She was no longer just the silent wife. She was a strategist. She was a player. She was a force to be reckoned with. And Megyn Kelly, she was forced to confront the limits of her own power. She had met someone who could not be manipulated. And that realization was a hard pill to swallow. The aftermath of the interview was messy. Megyn tried to spin it on her next show. She claimed that she had gotten the answers she needed. She claimed that the audience loved the toughness. But the ratings told a different story. The social media sentiment told a different story. The narrative had escaped her control. She had tried to frame Melania as a victim of her own past, but Melania had framed herself as a survivor of the present, and survivors resonate. Victims evoke pity, but survivors evoke respect. Melania had chosen respect, and in doing so, she had won the room, she had won the debate, she had won the story. But the story does not end there. The impact of that day rippled outwards. It changed how other journalists approached Melania. They became more cautious. They became more respectful. They realized that the easy target was not so easy. They realized that silence could be a weapon, and it changed how Melania viewed herself. She saw that her style worked. She saw that she did not need to shout to be heard. She saw that she could hold her own against the toughest opponents in the media. It gave her confidence. It gave her agency. It gave her a voice, even if she chose not to use it often. For Megyn, it was a wake-up call. It reminded her that journalism is not just about asking questions. It is about listening. It is about connecting. It is about understanding the human being in front of you. She had failed to connect. She had failed to listen. She had been so focused on her agenda that she had missed the person. And that mistake cost her. It cost her credibility. It cost her momentum. It was a lesson learned the hard way. A lesson etched into the memory of millions of viewers. Looking back, the interview was a microcosm of the larger cultural battle. It was a battle between noise and silence, between aggression and calm, between judgment and dignity. And in that battle, silence won, calm won, dignity won. It was a reminder that in a world full of shouting, the quietest voice can sometimes be the loudest. It was a reminder that power is not always about domination. Sometimes power is about endurance. Sometimes power is about staying true to yourself, no matter how hard others try to shake you. The room that day was divided. Half the people wanted blood, half the people wanted truth. But in the end, they got something else. They got a mirror, they saw tea. Their own biases reflected in the interaction. They saw their own desires for drama, and they saw the reality of two women playing a very high-stakes game. One played with fire, the other played with ice. And ice does not burn, it freezes, it preserves, it lasts. Today, when we look back at that interview, it stands as a testament to the complexity of public life. It shows us that nothing is as simple as it seems. It shows us that beneath the surface of every headline there is a human story. A story of ego, a story of fear, a story of strategy, and a story of survival. Melania survived the interview. Megyn survived the backlash, but both were changed. Both were marked by the experience. And we, the audience, were left to pick up the pieces and decide what it all meant. What do you think? Did Melania win? Or did Megyn hold her ground? The answer depends on what you value. Do you value aggression, or do you value composure? Do you value exposure, or do you value privacy? The debate continues, the division remains, but the moment itself is etched in history, a moment of silence that spoke volumes, a moment of calm that shook the foundations of a media empire, a moment that proved that sometimes the best defense is no defense at all, just presence. Just being, just standing firm. As the lights dimmed in the studio that day and the crew packed up their equipment, there was a sense of awe. They had seen something rare. They had seen a collision of titans, and they had seen one titan stand unmovable. It was a lesson in power, a lesson in control, a lesson in the art of the deal, and it was a lesson that neither woman would ever forget. The legacy of that interview is still being written. Every time a public figure chooses silence over noise, they echo that day. Every time a journalist faces a wall of calm, they remember that day. It set a precedent. It raised the bar. It showed that the old tricks do not always work. It showed that the audience is smart. It showed that people crave authenticity, even if it is wrapped in silence. So the next time you watch an interview, pay attention. Pay attention to the silence. Pay attention to the eyes. Pay attention to the hands. Look for the shifts in power. Look for the moments where the script breaks down, because that is where the truth lives. That is where the real story is. And that is where you will find the drama that matters. This story is a reminder that we are all watching. We are all judging. But we are also learning. We are learning that strength comes in many forms, and sometimes the strongest form is the one that says nothing at all. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of the most captivating media moments of our time. If you found this analysis insightful, please share it with others. Start a conversation, debate the points, explore the nuances. That is how we grow, that is how we understand, and that is how we keep the story alive. Subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden dynamics of power and politics. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and stay tuned. The next big moment is always just around the corner, and we will be there to break it down for you. The echoes of that day still resonate. in the halls of power, in the newsrooms, in the living rooms of America. It was a clash of styles, a clash of egos, a clash of worlds. And in that clash, a new reality was born. A reality where silence is loud, where calm is dangerous, where dignity is defiant. Melania versus Megyn. It was not just a debate. It was a declaration that the rules have changed, a declaration that the game is different now, and a declaration that some things cannot be broken, no matter how hard you try. The room was divided, but the verdict was clear. In the court of public opinion, the woman who stayed calm won the case. The woman who kept her cool kept her crown, and the woman who tried to take it all ended up with nothing but questions, questions that had no answers, questions that haunted her, questions that reminded her that she was not invincible, that she was human, that she could fail. And that failure, when broadcast to the world, is the hardest thing of all to bear. But from that failure, lessons were learned, for both sides, for all of us. We learned that perception is reality. We learned that control is an illusion. We learned that the most powerful person in the room is often the one who needs it the least. Melania needed the validation of the interview the least, and that is why she won. Megyn needed the win the most, and that is why she lost. Neediness is weakness, confidence is strength, and on that day, confidence wore a white dress and a serene smile. And it changed everything. The story ends, but the impact remains. It lingers in the way journalists prepare. It lingers in the way politicians perform. It lingers in the way we watch. We watch with sharper eyes. We listen with deeper ears. We look for the truth behind theater, and we find it in the moments of silence, in the pauses, in the glances, in the unspoken words. That is where the drama lives. That is where the truth hides. And that is where we must look. So keep watching, keep listening, keep questioning, because the next big showdown is coming, and it will be just as intense, just as dramatic, just as revealing, and we will be here to guide you through it, to help you see what others miss, to help you understand what matters. Join us, be part of the conversation, be part of the discovery, be part of the truth. The end of this script is not the end of the story. It is just the end of this chapter. The book of history is still being written, and every day new pages are added, new conflicts arise, new heroes emerge, new villains fall, and we are here to document it all with clarity, with passion, with depth. Thank you for your time, thank you for your attention, and thank you for caring enough to look deeper. Remember, the surface is rarely the truth. The truth is underneath, in the details, in the emotions, in the human connection or the lack thereof. Find it, seek it, share it. That is our mission, that is our promise, and that is our passion. Until we meet again, stay sharp, stay engaged, and never stop asking why. Because the why is always more interesting than the what, and the how is always more revealing than the who.